great Swedish songs from way back when in the 70s. We're going to look at some of these patterns that are developed, the repetition, where he talked about the seed. You'll see, okay, here's a seed theme, here's a seed theme, here's a seed theme, here's a judgment theme, here's a judgment theme, here's a judgment theme. And you'll see how he's packaging this entire story together. And it's really a beautiful work for somebody like me who doesn't like English. Discourse, I'll let you read that up there. Understanding the time and place in which something was said. And for us, that's really hard because we don't have any eyewitnesses to what was going on. We're passed along different stories. We have the Bible, but we also have other things. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls are out there, but you have something like Sennacherib who's in here, and there's this prism that was written and tracked the history of Assyria around the time of his reign. And the dates are close, but they pretty much line up with what's recorded in the Bible as far as laying siege to 46 different cities and towns and fortresses all over Israel and Judah. The thing is, though, the Assyrians only wrote down their victories, and so there's not a whole lot about what happened around Jerusalem and the fact that it was a miraculous recovery that Hezekiah prayed for. We'll get into that later. But that part's not recorded in the Assyrian history. They only record their victories. But it still lines up with what we have in the Bible. Let's see. No real, nothing unusual up there as far as what we've been saying, but it's how it's presented in the audience at that time that we have to try to get into to further understand the work of Isaiah and not just the literal translation of what's in the work. Arcing, when you're looking at the difference between arcing and bracketing, yes, one's a square and one's a little looped. All right, I got that part. But arcing, you're looking at those smaller things, those propositions that are in the middle of a story that connect one to another. So when we were looking at something like, when we were talking about Mark, that was more bracketing, where you had a big story, another story, the main story, and then we repeated the other two. That's more bracketing. Arcing is when you're looking inside one of those stories of how they go together, and that's when you get into some of those patterns that we mentioned. When you think about modern music today, there's always a pattern in there. The songs we sang today, we had 4 different verses for things that JD went through, but they were the same notes going over and over again, so it got into our heads and we can remember them over time. That's the same thing that's going on here, but we lose all of that in translation because the words don't necessarily mean the same. There could be, like Tim and I were talking yesterday, was it a plumb line that came down that they were talking about, or was it tin? And just when you start to get different interpretations of what that word meant in that context, changes the whole meaning of a story. And so I want to spend some time on that today, but I also want to spend some time reading. Bracketing, like I said, it surrounds the main point, and it's multiple paragraphs or multiple chapters that'll do the bracketing. All right, so we're going to read. So this is one translation. If you have a different one, we'll go into that as well. So somebody please read this. Larry?
Like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be eaten by the sword. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
All right, who has a different translation? NIV. And I have New American Standard if I need to pull that one out too. Okay, outstanding. Yes, please.
Come now and let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
All right. That's just 2 different translations of the same scripture, but now I want to read it a little bit differently, with a little bit more emphasis as would be have spoken at that time. Let's read it, Larry, and I want you to put emphasis on where I have colored words on this as we go through.
Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. If you are willing and obedient, consent and obey, you shall eat the good of the land, eat the best of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be eaten by the sword.
Or devoured by the sword, depending on which translation that you had there. So it's not just when we go through, a lot of times for me, when I'm reading, I just read the words to get from, chapter 1 to chapter 66, because I'm going to get done with it. I don't take the time to read it as it was spoken. I don't take that time myself to really get into the words. I just get through them sometimes. And so I wanted us to slow down and take a look at how Isaiah is presenting these words to everybody to emphasize his point that it's black and white, it's red and white in this case, on the differences between good and evil, between doing what's right and doing what's wrong. And it's obvious to those people who've been on the wrong side of this, of what they're doing. And it follows those patterns. I can't get down to the bottom because I can't see it above the screen there. All right, I want to turn to Isaiah 21, or 121 and 126. You could look at, we had those examples that contrasted themselves. Red as scarlet, white as the wool. And now we're having faithful city, those people that are following what God's telling them to do, and those that don't, and referring to them as a harlot and sinning. And you see that repeated, but it's not in one verse right after another like you just saw. This is still arcing. This is still telling one story, going back, forth, back, forth. It's still within the concept of arcing within a story. But as we said last week, that brings out the point that all these little headings and numbers and chapter separations are all stuff that we put in after the fact. These were just scrolls written out. One story from 1 to 66. One long scroll that has all of the stories in it. So they needed some way to capture, okay, this is our point. This is, here's this message. Here's the next one. Here's the next one. And so they didn't get lost in the translation, if you will, but they didn't get lost in just one word after another after another. They built in that repetition so that you could hear it again and again and again, and then you know where that story ended and the next one began. It wasn't just because it said chapter 2 ends here, chapter 3 starts here. No, that's not the way it always works. Our chapter 3, may still be a continuation of chapter 2 as we saw in Mark. All right. So as we broke down Isaiah, as you saw up on the video and you have on your hands, you could break down the first 35 chapters into those sections, and you can combine 36 and 39 with 28, or you could leave it independent, and then you do the last third of the book as the other bookend to the story. So you have bad things are going to happen. It's going to go from bad to worse when you go from Assyria to Babylon, but then there's that promise of hope in the end, and that's how the second third is structured. All right, so the first 12 chapters, as was discussed in there. So what was the general theme of the first 12 chapters? You got it in front of you on the cheat sheet if you need it. What was going to happen? Judgment. By whom? Well, God's going to let Assyria, all the other nations around them, Yeah, spanking, okay. Spanking's a... All right. Let's go through this now. So, chapter 1, that's going to be the basic judgment of Judah. Then you go into 2, or correction. In this case, we're going to do the entire spread. Because what I said when I first looked at this was, 6:8, Isaiah 6:8 is the verse that I always go to. That's, here am I, send me. And so that's what I always thought was the most important thing. And I was like, why does it not come, that calling, that, burning purification by fire, not come till, chapter 6? Shouldn't that be chapter 1? Here's my calling, here's the start. But it's not until 6. And why is that? When you look at 1 through 12, it's bracketed. All right, you have, here's the judgment that's going to come, and then you go down to 12, which nobody can see here. But it's that promise of after judgment, there's going to be that hope and return of joy. 2 through 4. Is it already time? Oh, my goodness. I guess I got to hurry through this. 2 through 4 brackets with 8 through 11, where you're talking about here's the judgment that's going to come, but there's a glorious future that's going to be ahead of you. However, to get to that glorious future, you're going to be destroyed. So you're judged. However, there's hope, but there's going to be bad things that are going to happen to you. And that's bracketed between 5 and 7. And then what I thought, should have been number 1, but it really is number 1 when you look at the big structure, is chapter 6 is that calling of Isaiah. And so when you're telling the story, it's here's the judgment. It's going to be bad. Here's the judgment. We have a glorious future. It's going to be bad. And then here's Isaiah with his message in the middle. And then they frame it back out with, here's the destruction that's coming. Remember that we do have a great hope in a future past judgment. But the last part in the bracket, remember the story is, yeah, it's going to be good, but right now we're not so good. And there's going to be this judgment against us. And that's how they know that story has ended. They've gotten to that end bracket from the first 12 chapters of, you're not doing well, here's the judgment. We're going to have, a hope even after this judgment, but it's going to be bad. And then you have Isaiah in the middle with his message and his calling. And then it repeats the sequence back out within the chapters. And that's bracketing. Any questions on that? Silence. All right. So within each one of those chapters, you remember the message where he kept highlighting the seed in there? Within each one of those chapters, so we had the bracketing going on outside the first 12 chapters, and now inside each one of the chapters, you'll see, or each one of the sections, you'll see that same pattern repeated, where you're getting judged. There's gonna you've made mistakes along the way, but it's going to be okay. And the format is the same throughout. The seed themes repeated in each one of those different chapters, and then it's talking about the nations, who's going to do it, what's it going to look like. And that pattern's repeated in each one of those different chapters. So as you're going forward and reading this week, start to look for those bigger patterns that aren't just, the red and the scarlet, the white and the wool. Look for those bigger ones where, okay, here's where the story starts. Here's where it's taking me along the way. And I know it's kind of hard because we're jumping around and we don't have just straight Isaiah that we're reading every day. But take a look at when we are reading those patterns of Isaiah. How do they all fit together? And what are they trying to tell? What's the bigger picture besides here's just the story? So I appreciate everybody's attention today. Look forward to next week. Next week, the first however long she needs, Sarah Baldwin's going to be here. Grace Baldwin's going to be here. And Grace is going to talk about not just what she did this year on her mission, but what she's looking forward to do next year down at Virginia Tech. So thanks, everybody, for your attention.